Hello, this is John Mangini, Vice President of Marketing with the New Jersey Bankers Association. Welcome to the New Jersey Banker Podcast. Today, our President and CEO, Mike Affuso, sits down with Adam Geller, founder and CEO of National Research, Inc., for a discussion on the development of political polls and messaging, why they sometimes get it wrong, the most important polling question to ask, and more.
Thanks, John. I want to thank today's guest, Adam Geller, founder and CEO of National Research, Inc. Welcome, Adam. You know, we see a lot of polling today on all different issues. Particularly presidential polling, and sometimes polls are right, sometimes polls are wrong. So I was hoping maybe today you could talk to us a little bit about your polling methodology and how do you go about conducting your surveys?
Well, first, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you so much for having me. You're right. I mean, the polls are all over the place. They're enough to give people whiplash. And I'll tell you, it can be really frustrating for people like me who do this for a living because, we take it very seriously. We have to get it right because for me and for other campaign pollsters, we're working on these multi-million-dollar campaigns sometimes. And if you don't get it right, and if you're not good at it, you don't get to do it much, you won't get hired, where sometimes these, kind of public pollsters don't really have that kind of pressure on them. They can afford to get it wrong. And then it's, oops, we got it wrong. We'll figure out why we got it wrong. We'll do it again. I mean, there's a million different reasons why some of these polls can be off. Most of it has to do with bad methodology, not talking to the right sample, not having a really balanced sample. There's other factors. And then every once in a while, I've seen polling where if you look at the poll, it's really not bad, but then the analysis is way off. The pollster's apologetic or somehow sheepish and is almost trying to argue against what the poll says. And if you just step back, you're going, I don't know. I mean, the poll seems right. The analysis seems wrong. I'll give you a quick example and then we can move on. We do a poll that shows a 40-40 tie. Okay, 40-40 tie, pretty good. What about the rest of the 20%? Well, the rest of the 20% is undecided. Okay, well, see, my job as a campaign pollster is to figure out where that 20% goes. Now, a 40-40 tie in a top line number is just the start of the analysis. Now, I'm gonna analyze the survey and look at that 20%. Where are they in the generic ballot? Where are they in the images of the candidates? Where are they on the issues? How are they registered? What's their ideology? There's a million questions you can ask. Then you can figure out where you think they're going to go. They're undecided, but how do we think they're going to break? Well, of that 20%, maybe 15% go to one candidate and 5% go to the other candidate. So suddenly 40-40 really becomes 55-45. Okay, well, that's the analysis. So if that's what I'm going to tell you, my client, well, the top line's 40-40, but this is what I think is going to happen based on the messaging and based on the budget and based on everything going on. I'm looking at about 55-45. Now, that's how you analyze a poll. I mean, a real shorthand, not really, but as an example. So then if suddenly somebody were to look back at the numbers and go, gee, that poll had it 40-40, but it ended up being 55-45. What happened? Well, the poll was right. And then the analysis nailed it. But if you're just looking at the top line and you're not listening to the analysis, then it could seem like it's wrong.
So that's the analysis of, the horse race as you're coming to the finish line. Right. Start with the use of polling to develop messaging at the beginning of the campaign. Explain to our listeners how you do that and how, your initial polling is so important to drive messaging.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And, I've been doing this for 30 years. I am a Republican pollster. Now, over the course of my 30 years, I've worked with lots of Democratic pollsters, many of whom are my friends, and many of whom are great pollsters and great people. And we all kind of do the same thing. I mean, it's, we all, generally speaking, take that same approach. And, you're right. It's such a great question, Mike, because what I do, like the ballot, the horse race question is almost the least important, especially in the early polls. We do message development. So anytime, we're in a campaign, we might test sort of the initial ballot where people are. We know a lot of people are undecided or they need to know more about the candidates. But we test a series of messages, the efficacy of a message. Would you be more likely or less likely to vote for so-and-so if you knew the following, ... And some people would say, gee, some of those questions are a little like, sort of, biased or this or that or whatever. Well, yeah, they are. I mean, what you're trying to do is you're trying to persuade people to see, would you be less likely to vote for so-and-so if you knew that they raised taxes? Okay. If you knew that they supported, some bad policy or whatever it was, you're trying to get a sense of what's going to move voters, what's going to move undecided voters, what's going to move what we call the persuadable voters and all that stuff. And almost 90% of the time, the messages that test the best end up being in television commercials or something like that. And so later on in the survey, we may say, now that you know that, would you be more likely or less likely to vote for so-and-so, vote for each of these candidates? And you really want to track some of the movement. So it's a little heavy-handed, but it really does work. You want to get a sense of which messages work. And Mike, I'll tell you one more thing before we move on. What my joke is that the goal as a campaign pollster is to get the ballot question wrong. And by that, I mean, so we're taking this poll and initially I'll ask who you vote for, candidate A or candidate B, and then I'm going to ask all these questions. Well, the whole idea is to take that ballot that we found and to completely change it. If I'm working for candidate A and we see that candidate A is coming in at 35% in this poll, I don't want to be right. The whole goal of the campaign and everything else is to change those numbers. How do we get this person to over 50%, right? So if at the end of the campaign, candidate A is still at 35%, I haven't done my job. 35% isn't going to be enough to win it. So again, to your point, it's all about which messages, which issues move and persuade voters to get us over the 50% plus one line, as we call it.
So you're a political professional. You're paid to poll, and your campaigns are based upon the precision by which you poll in the beginning. And that's how we drive the message. And a whole lot of money is spent based upon the messaging that you develop based upon the polling. And we hope that your candidate wins based upon the messaging, which should drive the final polling, which should determine where we're going to land on election night. So you are a professional, and that's why they hire you. When you have these other pollsters for news organizations, as you said, that kind of put their hands up and decide that they can, be right or be wrong, you alluded to the 40 and 40 and the 20% persuadable. What about when you're really coming to a horse race and we're at a point where it's, 5% persuadable? Mm-hmm. Why is it that a lot of those pollsters, the professionals, get it wrong?
Well, again, there's probably a gazillion different reasons why some of those professionals get it wrong. I mean, a lot of times what I have observed, and look, these days people are accountable, like campaign pollsters and public pollsters for that matter. You got these web like 538, they'll grade the pollsters. Yeah. I've got a good grade. I think I'm an AB, which I got to see what those Bs are about, but whatever. But I digress. So, like my mother would say, yeah, B is fine, just relax. So I'm an AB, whatever. I think that a lot of times, though, what happens is the human nature is I want to correct last cycle's wrongs, right? And I think that that's really a big mistake. I think that what happens is, everybody looks and sees, well, how did they do in, 2018? And, oh, well, we oversampled this group or we undersampled that group or whatever, and we're going to fix it for 2020. Not realizing 2020 is a completely different animal. There's different turnout models and stuff. So then they overcorrect from what they did in 2018, and they start overthinking it. They overcorrect, and suddenly here comes 2020. Now they went the other way. Now, suddenly, whoever it was, Trump was underrepresented in some states and blah, blah, blah. So now they want to do it again. And now they want to fight last year's battles again in 2022. They're always chasing something from like 2 years ago, and they're trying to, and what happens is they overcorrect. And so you got to just really stop thinking sometimes. Stop overthinking. Okay. Just trust your process. And if your process is, who are the likely voters? Let's make sure we're looking at newly registered voters and people who may not have voted last time, but we're going to give them a chance to screen in the survey now and look at all the data and really try to not be so specific in terms of the actual number of people you need from the northern part of the state or district or what have you, but just give it a range. Let the poll breathe a little bit. Maybe some years there is going to be a higher female turnout. Well, if suddenly I'm terrified, I need my poll to be 50-50 male and female. Now suddenly I'm putting my own, kind of anxiety, my own neuroses on what the poll is trying to tell me. The poll is trying to tell me, dude, we think female turnout might be 54% this year. Let the poll tell you that. Let the poll breathe a little bit,
So I guess that's why we should be suspect of national polls as we're coming really down the pike here.
Well, I'm suspect of national polls for a lot of reasons, including the fact that if we're looking at the presidential race, the national poll means absolutely nothing. The Democrat traditionally is going to do better in national polls because you've got ginormous populous states like California and New York and, Illinois and places where Democrats do really, really well. And so in a national poll, that kind of helps them out. But obviously, we all know this. We're all paying attention. We know that the race is probably going to come down to 6 or 7 battleground states. And so those are the polls in the aggregate that I would pay attention to. And really speaking to your question, Mike, of why some of these polls are wrong. If you look at the averages, which is a smart thing to do in these things, and you take a bunch of polls, generally speaking, some of those outliers, if you will, they get a little watered down. So it's better to look at polling averages over time, especially in the battlegrounds, not as much in the national polls, because it's very likely that a Democrat can win a popular vote, but not win an electoral college vote. That's just, we've seen that time and time again, but that has to do more with population distributions in some, big, huge populous states.
So we're talking about battlegrounds. What do you think is going to be the most important swing state as these two candidates chase 270?
Well, I'm probably going to agree with a lot of people and say everything kind of runs through Pennsylvania. But, when people say that, right, well, they're making a lot of assumptions, and they're assuming that, other states like North Carolina or Georgia or whatever go to the Republican column. Kind of sometimes the assumptions are, if Trump wins these states and Harris wins these states, then Pennsylvania's me everything. I am still of the opinion that Pennsylvania is going to be, the make or break. But the thing that scares me is like North Carolina right now, with this Mark Robinson, the gubernatorial candidate, really cratering. That makes me nervous. Now, I'm doing a bunch of polling in some super PACs and for some corporate clients. I'm not polling in North Carolina, so I haven't seen my own numbers. So I'm relying on some of the other data that I'm seeing, but it makes me nervous to see the sort of down ballot ticket, if you will, cratering as much as it is. It just, there's a lot of things that keep me up at night. I'm not going to lie, especially this time of year. I don't get a lot of sleep in October, man.
I can imagine. So when you're looking at national trends in your surveys, what do you see out there that really surprises you? And is there anything out there that surprises you?
Well, I'm not going to say that it surprises me, but I'll tell you what I think is fascinating, right? I think we're looking at an election right now where I think that there's a Democratic strategy of running a personality-driven race and a Republican strategy of running an issues race. None of them are right. None of them are wrong. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, well, you have to run on the issues. Well, that's not true. There's plenty of races out there that are personality driven. There's also plenty of races that are issues driven. So the point that I would make is it'll be interesting to see, obviously, how that plays out. Now, that's not, and I'll be fair, there are plenty of issues that the Democrats are running on, specific issues, right? But there's a personality contrast that they're definitely trying to play up. And of course, look, on the issues, we can get away from the personality for a second, but is it going to be inflation and border, or is it going to be reproductive rights and some of these other types of things? You asked me what is surprising, and I'm not sure that I'm surprised by this, but man, I'm fascinated by it. It is really interesting to me, and I don't know that there's any real, prediction or right answer right now. I think the polls are kind of wiggling all over the place, and I think that that's sort of a natural thing. But that's something that I'm just really, really paying a lot of attention to, and I don't know right now, where it's going to go.
So I guess I'll ask it to you differently. You're getting to pick your candidate, and you have one candidate that's super likable, really attractive candidate.
Yeah.
Right. And you would say that person is likable and has broad appeal even to the other party. And then you have another candidate that you've polled the issues and that person is 90% correct on 90% of the issues. Who do you want to work for? Because we know you want to hang.
Who would you be talking? What? Okay.
No. Who do you want to work for, though? Do you want to work for the person that has that intangible, likable piece, or do you want to have the candidate that you just know if you keep hammering your issues and putting enough out there on those issues that you're going to win?
Well, listen. The goal is to win the race, right? And so. Here's how I would answer, and I am going to answer your question. But before I do that, I'm going to give you an hour and a half of qualifiers. No, I'm just kidding. I know we don't have that much time, but I'll give you a couple of qualifiers. Now let's remove the current presidential race,
of course.
and let's make this an academic discussion. I would say that some of it really would depend on the state of the economy and the state of the condition of other people's lives. But by and large, in 2024 America, you'd rather have the more likable candidate, because these days voters really are making decisions based on emotional connections rather than rational decisions. Madison Avenue figured this out many, many years ago. Political consultants are just coming around to it now. We're a little slow with some of this stuff, but you have to just understand the psychology of the American voter in 21st century America is going to be very heavily based on emotional decision making. And so that's what I would say. Now, again, there's a million qualifiers, and some of it has to do with the economy, the state of war, other stuff. But but generally speaking, you'd always rather have the more likable candidate. Now, in the current presidential, both candidates have pockets of likability and both candidates have pockets of unlikability. It is not fair to either candidate to say that they are popular with broad swaths of the electorate, but it's also not fair to either to say that they are unpopular with broad swaths. We have a very partisan split right now. We're right down the middle. And, there is certainly, I think, strategy to be considered for improving favorable ratings, as we call them in the polling biz, but also making sure that they're right on the issues that are most important to these voters, even in the kind of divided electorate that we have.
So when you're going to do your polling to drill down to issues, do you have a question that you think is just you got to ask it? It's the most important question to ask of the folks that you're going to survey.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, and so that's a good question, and I'll surprise you with my answer because it ain't the ballot. Okay, that would be too easy, right? Yeah, who are you going to vote for? This guy or that guy? Okay, no, we're not going to do that. I think that one of the most overlooked and interesting questions is the right direction, wrong track number. Okay, are things going in the right direction, or have things gotten off on the wrong track? Whether it's nationally or whether it's in your state or your district or your town, that gives you so much insight into the relative strength or weakness of an incumbent, the mood, as we call it, of the electorate. And from there, you can kind of gauge other things. Is this electorate satisfied? Are they unsatisfied? And if they're unsatisfied, is it a frustration, right? Is there an anger? Is there a disappointment? Like, what's the mood? And so I think from a very, very broad perspective, and obviously there's a million other questions we pollsters can ask. It's what we do. But man, if I can only ask one, I'm going to go right direction, wrong track.
So let me push you on that a little bit.
Go for it.
Right direction, wrong direction.
Yeah.
Right now, wrong direction is winning in a landslide.
Yeah.
But the polls are really tight. Trump-Harris, right? Like it's a pick 'em right now. Yeah. So tell me why is there a divergence? And I tend to agree with you that you want to know, do you think things are doing well? But there's a group of people right now that are answering that question and saying, no, we're on the wrong track, but I'm going to vote for the semi-incumbent party. How do you tease that?
Well, if you look at it, right, I think that the Kamala Harris campaign is a smart campaign, very, very capable. Well, they've seen it too, because you have the current sitting vice president running as the agent of change. So they're seeing the same thing. Okay, they understand that right direction, wrong track number, and it scares the you-know-what out of them. And so suddenly they're not going to sit here and say everything is, yes, Kamala has been vice president for the past 3.5 years, and here's where we are and all that. She is running as a change agent. Obviously, there is a disconnect there, and that's a big problem for, generally speaking, the incumbency, the party of the incumbent, or the party in this case of what we'll call it the semi-incumbent. So it's a disconnect. Look, there's going to be a pocket, if you look at it by partisanship, of Democrats of Harris voters who also say things are off on the wrong track. And if you ask them why things are off on the wrong track, they're going to give you reasons that have to do with their belief in their ideology. It might be Roe v. Wade, it may be other things. So they're pissed off too. And so it requires, as all things do, a little bit of a deeper dig, a little bit of a deeper dive, but that's what we do.
It's great. It's great. Well, I appreciate your time. I think our listeners will really enjoy this. and come away with a better understanding, particularly as we come down to the end of this race, as to exactly what's going on and what people. It'll give them a more discerning palate when they consume the news, which is certainly a great thing.
It is, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. You know, polling is just sometimes used and abused and misunderstood and all over the place, and hopefully people can, you know, at least begin to make sense of some of it. But really, when you're looking at that tie score in some battleground states, think about how many people are undecided in that survey and see if there's any way you can figure out a little bit more. Maybe the pollster can tell you a little bit more about them. And if you can try and think how they might distribute on Election Day.
Great insights. So once again, I want to thank my very special guest, Adam Geller, founder and CEO of National Research, Inc. And for the New Jersey Banker Podcast, I'm Mike Affuso.